You can see where the edge of the stockade wall was. Now just over here, this little room here is the guard's night room, and it was the magistrate's office. Now over there in the kitchen area, the baker's got a separate cell so they wouldn't wake anyone up. They took that so seriously that at night the guards would wear little cloth booties over their shoes so their feet would not make any noise as they walked along the wooden floors. They weren't being nice. The men here are expected to do 9.5 hours of hard labour every day. They want us to get a good night's sleep so we can wake up and do another 9.5 hours of hard labour the next day. They actually had a clock system here. There was a master clock in the night room, and at the end of each corridor of the cell blocks there was a slave clock, and the guards had to go along with their keys. They would turn the key in the clock, and that would mark the time so that they knew the guards were actually doing their rounds and were not spending all night in the room just drinking cocoa. Now, as we said, it was also the magistrate's court. He came out on Tuesdays. He was a supposedly neutral third party, and he would decide what punishments would be given out, if any. Now, it was not just complaints against the prisoners he would hear. He could also hear complaints that guards may have had against the superintendent, or the superintendent may have had against the guards. The guards had more rules to follow than the prisoners. For instance, a guard was not allowed to leave a tower to relieve himself. If he was caught, he could be docked wages or may even lose his job. Also, as we mentioned, it was a dry island. If a guard was caught with alcohol, he could lose his job. But as for the prisoners and those harsh punishments, now, one prisoner, he was caught whistling in his cell on a Sunday. This is a silent prison. He was charged with breaking the rule of silence. That prisoner had to spend 5 days in solitary confinement for whistling a hymn in his cell on Sunday. Another prisoner, he was in the chapel, which was at the end of D block down here. He stood up during the service and said something along the lines of, "By God, if somebody doesn't give me a bloody Bible, I will do a bloody murder." The magistrate said that man had every right to ask for a Bible in church, so there was no punishment recorded against him. He was the neutral third party. Personally, I think the reason he only came out on Tuesdays was that everybody just complained at him. Now, just before we move on, I always like to point out here, all this beautiful detail work on the wall is all fake. That's all been put into the render that went over the beach rock. This place was built during the Victorian era. They celebrated industry. Just because it's a maximum security prison, there's no reason why it can't look pretty. So they went to the trouble of putting in faux brickwork and all these faux details. All fake. We recently saw a photograph, a high resolution photograph of a guard tower. And around the eaves, there's beautiful hand-done filigree fretwork around the eaves of a guard tower. But this place, as I said, celebrated industry. Now, as I mentioned before, cell block D was along here. There were 4 cell blocks, imaginatively named A, B, C and D. Most of them were made out of wood, but if you'd like to go just around the corner, you'll see the remains of cell block B, the only cell block left on the island. Yes. That big thing there, that was the water stand. All of the water stand.
That's an unfortunate sweat stain, isn't it?
Quite.
The other two were laughing about it.
Yeah, I heard.
That's a great picture.
Plenty of room down this way as well.
Now please move around so you can see inside the cell block. Now ladies and gentlemen, there are 4 cell blocks on St Helena, A, B, C and D. Very, creative in the naming. Now there are up to 3 350 prisoners incarcerated here at any one time. Cell blocks A and B are what we call the 12-man wards, 12 men per cell. C and D blocks were the single-man cells for the more harsher prisoners. As 321 told you, this is some of the remains of cell block B. Please use your imagination here. A corridor running through the centre here. A wall here. A wall here. One cell. 12 men. Another 12 there, there and there. So 48 men enclosed in this area that you still see standing before you today. Remember, when they got issued their prison kit, they got issued a hammock. That was for their sleeping. There were no beds. You can see the hooks on the back of the wall there. Okay? So 3 at the bottom, 3 at the top. Metal frame in the middle, 3 at the bottom, 3 at the top. That's how you fit 12 men into that space there. There is no indoor plumbing here. So there was one bucket in the corner for all 12 men to share overnight. Ladies, in the middle of the night and pitch black, are your husband's good shots? Don't answer that. But here, you can imagine how much heat this beach rock holds for the prisoners in here. Now the mosquitoes coming in. Okay, we might have mosquito coils, netting these days. They didn't have that. One prisoner stole the offcuts from a leather shop, made himself a mask to combat the mosquitoes. He was caught and charged with stealing government property. These were the offcuts that were going in the bin. The prisoners had no rights while they were here. Now before we go down to prisoner 31 outside the exercise yards, there were 6 exercise yards, A, B, C, D, E and F. You may remember from the model. This is exercise yard A and B. Now, although I don't like to talk politics, most people have heard of the Australian Labor Party. Now, the Labor Party was formed really in 1891. Those 22 men, the ringleaders from the big shearers strike up at Barcaldine, were sentenced. They were sentenced to jail. Guess where they came? Here, to St. Helena. You might have seen the museum. Those men were in exercise yards A and B. These 2 yards here are where the talks began, which started the Labor Party. So this is where the Australian Labor Party started, those 2 yards right there. If you are a Labor fan, that tree of knowledge with this volcanic soil, if they planted it here, it would be thriving to this very day. Please go down to prisoner